I was shivering uncontrollably when my eyes finally burst open. What happened? I sat up and groaned, instantly feeling dizzy. Ugh, that's right. I'm in jail. After recovering from my head rush, I stood up and walked over to the bars. There was an officer a couple cells down. He noticed me staring and smirked, pulling out his walkie-talkie. Yeah, ma'am. Criminal 108 is awake. Cuff her and bring her down, a woman's voice replied. Yes, ma'am. With that, he clipped his walkie-talkie back onto his belt and walked over to my cell. It's such a shame a pretty girl like you is stuck in this hellhole, he smirked again. My eyes filled with hatred and disgust for this guy. He swiftly grabbed both my hands and cuffed them behind my back. I didn't even put up a fight. This is what I deserved. This will keep me away from the world. It will keep all the people I love safe. This'll be easier than I thought, the officer said again from behind me, his breath on my neck. Yeah, don't get that close to me, I said, shuddering, my voice low and dark. The guy shrugged and started to lead me down a long, dark hallway. It almost looked like a scene from one of those cheesy ghost investigator shows where all the hands stick out of the cells and people beg for mercy and to be let out. Because you're so young, I'm going to give you some tips, the officer whispered, loud enough so that I could hear. First off, be super polite. They will appreciate it after dealing with arseholes all day. I nodded. Okay. Second, make eye contact. This will let them know you mean business. It will also lead them to think you're not lying. He sighed. And last, be honest to an extent. You never lie, ever. But being honest to an extent allows them to know the truth, just not the whole truth. Why are you helping me? I asked curiously. I mean, this can't be good for his job. Because you are young. You have your whole life ahead of you. He stopped and smiled. A small smile crept its way onto the corners of my lips as well. We're here, and remember what I said. Thank you, I said before taking a deep breath and walking into the interrogation room. There was a fairly large woman, large as in huge and buff, sitting in a chair across from where I was supposed to sit. Standing behind her were two also very large officers. Ah, Criminal 108. Please have a seat. I have a name, I growled, completely ignoring the first rule. Well, technically, she paused to look me dead in the eye, you don't. What do you mean I don't? I practically screamed, feeling extremely anxious. Have a seat, 108. I obeyed, walking over to the seat and sitting down awkwardly, considering my hands were still cuffed behind my back. I took a deep breath, closing my eyes. Now tell me why I don't technically have a name. After we caught you, like all inmates, I had to do background checks on you. She chuckled. But see, this is where it becomes difficult. You don't have a background. What do... I paused, having a burst of reality slap me. Shh, let me finish. Well, we were used to dirty scumbags like you going back and clearing all their background. But after looking through some more, I realized that you aren't recorded as ever being born. She stood up and paced around the room. The name that you claim to go by is Sky Woods, right? Right? That's what I thought. I went back through some old files of mine because the name rang a bell. She snickered, raising an eyebrow. Tell me about Hope. My heart sank as I froze in fear. How did she know about my mother? Vivid images of my mum's motionless, bloody body laying on the dewy ground flashed into my mind. Tears rose in my eyes as I looked at the officer in disgust. Ah, so the name rings a bell? What do you know about her? I practically yelled once again. Well, if we're thinking of the same person, then you must know that she was a good student in school. She lost her father the summer before junior year in high school. A deep sigh escaped her throat. More like her father was murdered. Why are you telling me this? Why are you telling me this? She cut me off mid-sentence. You mustn't interrupt me any more. I nodded yes, out of fear. As I was saying, She ended up having a freakish love interest with her father's killer and had a child with him. We took the child into custody while we were looking for the killer. A week or so later, the mother and the child both went missing. She chuckled. And do you know what the funny part is? She asked me. I gulped, slowly shaking my head no. That child's name was Sky Woods. Why are you telling me this? I asked again, hatred and desperation burning in my eyes. If you are the same Sky Woods, then there is no doubt that your parents will come to rescue you. And then we will finally have the notorious Jeff the Killer. She smiled proudly. I looked down at the ground, causing my long, brown, blood-stained hair to fall into my face as a mysterious smile crept onto my face. Joke's on you, I whispered, loud enough for her to just barely hear me. What? What did you just say? I said, joke's on you. How so? She crossed her arms. You see, I giggled, looking up just enough so that she could see my eyes clearly. My father hates me. He won't come looking for me. She took a step back, shaking her head. Well, what about your mother? She will surely be worried about you. Then when she comes, we'll have her, and that will draw your father out as well, she explained, her voice everly uneasy. I laughed at her attempt to try and soothe her own mind. Oh no, you still seem mistaken. Really? She cocked her hip, ready for an explanation. My mother can't possibly come to get me, because I killed her. The grin on my face grew as all three officers' eyes grew wide, and they looked at one another. You're a monster, the female yelled, pointing at me. I'm not denying it. Take her back to the cell, she yelled at the other two officers in the room. They hesitantly made their way over to me as they grabbed my still handcuffed hands and dragged me back to my cell. I sat down on my bed as the men uncuffed me and locked the cell door. I pouted and rubbed my aching wrists. They definitely tightened them way too much. You better get a good night's rest, kiddo. You're going to be on trial tomorrow, the kind officer told me as he passed my cell. I sighed, rubbing my bloodshot eyes. Oh, I'll try. He smiled at me and continued to walk down the corridor, checking in on the other inmates. I laid down on my bed and stared intently at the bunk above me, which I'll be the first to admit is not all that fun. But it was the only thing I was able to do until I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Sky! Sky! Psst! Wake up! A bright flash of light abruptly woke me up. Everything was blurry at first, but after a few moments of blinking, my eyes finally adjusted. Before me stood an officer in his typical uniform, but there was something very familiar about this specific officer. Brent? I whispered, my voice shaky. His lips curled into a smile and he winked at me. My heart practically burst out of my chest. Wait, I thought for a second. Brent, what the fuck are you doing here? I came to rescue my girl, he smiled again, taking some keys from his pocket and unlocking the cell. We can probably escape through the back door. His eyes were so concentrated, so determined to get me out of my current situation. I couldn't control my feelings any longer. I wrapped my arms around his neck and hugged him tightly. He was tense at first, but loosened up and hugged me back, resting his chin on my head. Thank you for coming, I whispered into his chest. It's no big deal, Sky. I would do anything to keep you safe. He smiled, kissing my head. Okay, we need to leave now, he said, squeezing my shoulder. I nodded and followed him back to the door. After pushing it open, a loud alarm rang, alerting the officers that we were escaping. Shit, Brent said, running towards the forest. Quick, this way, I told Brent as we started running towards an old cabin hidden deep within the trees. They won't find us here, I promise. We ran into the house and locked the door. I could hear dogs barking and men yelling in the distance, but I was positive that there was no way they could possibly find us here. Both Brent and I stayed completely silent as we listened to the sounds of police slowly fade deeper into the forest. I think they're finally gone, Brent sighed in relief. I frowned at him, giving him a thorough look over. Sky, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. It's you I'm worried about. I could feel tears building up. The last time I saw you, you were a bloody unconscious mess in the woods. I choked. He smiled, gently moving a strand of hair from my face. I clenched my eyes tight, remembering that night. I almost lost you. Shh, it's okay. I'm here now. He smiled, pulling me in and gently wrapping an arm around me. I'm sorry for leaving you so suddenly that night. Memories started flooding back into my mind. Brent? I turned to look at him seriously in the eyes. What? He asked lovingly, concern in his eyes. If you don't mind me asking, why did you leave me that night? He bit his lip and looked away. Was he looking for an excuse? I had some business to take care of. Don't worry about it. He kissed my cheek. Seriously, Brent. I moved away from him, looking him in the eyes once again. I never got a good explanation for why you left me. You know just as well as I do that there are things that roam in that forest. It was dangerous to go alone. My heart was beating as my mind started racing, instantly jumping to the worst result. We stay in silence for a while before Brent finally clears his throat. You want the truth? He asked, raising an eyebrow. I nodded yes, nervously, feeling my stomach turn. He chuckled silently. Sky, I was looking for your mother. I felt lightheaded as I stood up. How? I was shaking as my mind raced in circles. What did he mean, my mother? How did he know my mother? Why was he looking for my mother? What the hell was going on? Would you care for me to explain myself? Brent asked, standing up and taking my quivering hands into his strong, steady ones. I nodded hesitantly. Do you remember the first time you came over my aunt's house? You asked me why I lived with my aunt, and I told you it was because my parents became abusive when my brother died. He frowned, squeezing my hand tighter. Actually, he didn't just die. He was murdered. By your mum. He growled, looking me dead in the eye. He then pulled me over to the couch sitting in the middle of the room and threw me down. I could feel tears rise in my eyes. I was in shock. After my parents got the news of my older brother's death, they became abusive. One night, an angel in black came to see me. She promised me that if I was loyal to her, she would help me catch my brother's killer. So for years I trained with her. He chuckled. She actually told me about you. So the first time I met you in the woods, that was no coincidence. I will admit that I was taken away by your beauty. My orders were to keep you alive and get close to you, which I did pretty damn good if I do say so myself. He leaned in and tried to kiss my cheek, but I pushed him off. Get off of me! I shouted, tears streaming down my face. How could he? Lead me on to break my heart? Anyway, that night we were talking about, the one where I left you. Okay, so the reason I left you was to find your mum and kill her, to finally get my revenge for what she did to my brother, to my family. That rotten bitch ruined my life, so I was going to end hers. But you want to know what made it even better? He asked, his eyes sparkling. She tried to tell you. She tried to explain to you that I was the one who attacked her, but you wouldn't listen. You did my job for me, he laughed like a maniac. Tears continued to stream down my face. I remembered me stabbing my own mother, and the reason I did it was because of him. My eyes burned as I looked at Brent, the first boy I was head over heels in love with, but now hated with a burning passion. You made me kill my mother, I said, pointing a shaky finger at Brent. Rage was quickly filling my body. You made me kill my mother, I screamed. He smiled and crossed his arms. That's right. Thank you for doing the dirty work for me. In fact, I probably would have died if it wasn't for you coming to rescue me. He chuckled. I clenched my teeth together. How dare you use me? I loved you, Brent. You want to know the funny thing? I never loved you. His words echoed in my ears. Doesn't he love me? I just stood there, processing what he said. Love me? I said blankly, staring at him. I scanned the room to see a coffee table in front of the sofa. I silently chuckled at the wickedly sharp corners of the mahogany table. Rage built up inside me. My mind went blank. I saw my reflection in his eyes. I had a wicked grin. I wrapped my hands around his neck, digging my fingernails into his throat. He choked and silently screamed as his windpipe was blocked by the pressure of my hands. I slammed his temple into the corner of the coffee table. He gasped for air and started crying and rolling around. I calmly walked to the kitchen and performed eeny, meeny, miny, moe to pick out a knife. I ended on the razor-sharp fillet knife. I walked back into the living room to see Brent struggling like a puppy with his hand in the doorway, trying his hardest to escape his fate. I giggled and kicked the door shut, crushing the bones and veins in his hand. He screamed, "Oh, quiet down, you little bitch. I never told you you could leave. You break my heart, I break you," I said, driving my knife into his thigh. I ripped the knife out of Brent's thigh and chuckled, skipping around him. Brent was actually scared out of his mind. I had completely lost it at this point, just like my mother and father did so long ago. And I love it. I am a merciless, feelingless, mindless killer. What's wrong, Brenty Boo? You aren't scared for a little of me, are you? I chuckled again, acting innocent like a little girl. Brent's face flushed, going a pale white as I started hopping in circles around him, humming classic show tunes. Brent was too scared to talk at this point. I giggled at the tears that wouldn't stop flowing down his cheeks. It's funny to see a man cry, I thought to myself. Come on, baby, learn to laugh. I giggled again, skipping over to the kitchen and grabbing a small, sharp knife. His eyes grew wide. Sky, he tried to croak out. I just placed the knife to his mouth and made a pouty face. He froze. Shh, love, don't try to speak. It's okay. I grabbed one of his hands in mine and pinned it to the floor. With my other hand, I slowly dug my knife through his hand. It made wonderful cracking noises as it slid through, eventually impaling on the floor. Brent was screaming at this point. I clasped my hand over his mouth to keep him quiet. Once he calmed a little, I did the same thing to the other hand. I stood up and admired my work. Brent was out of breath and half-conscious. Good job, Sky. I patted myself on the back before grabbing a pack of matches from the kitchen and walking outside of the old cabin. And with that, I burnt the place down, with Brent still alive in there. Well, 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 a familiar voice said from behind me.